Hello and welcome to episode 203 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are mostly going to be talking about our CDL 2026 wish lists and the New Year's resolutions. We did this last year, I think before the New Year, but obviously with the holiday just kind of falling where it did, and me puking my guts out for a day or two. Things got moved around, and we're here in 2026. So happy New Year to everybody who is listening or watching. We're going to be talking a lot about the CDL before it comes back next weekend. And we got some other stuff, some smaller stuff that we'll talk about as well. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. Hope you're feeling better and hope everyone else is off to a strong start to 2026. Less than we were exactly 5 days away from the resumption. Is that actually a word? The CDL resuming for the current season. So exciting times there. It hasn't. I don't know how you feel. It hasn't felt like it's been a super long break, even though it kind of has. But I don't know. Some years it feels longer than others, but this year it's kind of just been like, yeah, it's whatever. Maybe it's just because I've gotten used to there being a holiday break between the matches and whatnot. I don't really know, but yeah, we got some decent stuff to talk about. Hope everyone had happy holidays, happy New Year, all that good stuff. But CDL's back in less than a week, so we're back in the swing of things.
One of the biggest things that we talked about before the break was Alluka and what would happen with him and what his visa situation was. And obviously, there was considerable interest reportedly from FaZe Vegas about signing Alluka, and it seemed like that was the direction that things were trending. And that is actually what happened on December 29th. FaZe officially announced the signing of Alluka, and he will be their new substitute. Which is also something we talked about. And, he's probably going to be on the bench while his visa issue gets sorted out, however long that may take. So now that it's official, what do you think of Alluka joining FaZe?
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a good fit. Obviously, I think the hype around Alluka, the natural reaction for most people would have been to want to see him in the CDL right away. But I think the most interesting element to all this is Zuma saying on his stream that it was Alluka who said he himself decided that he wanted more time in challengers. He didn't want to get just thrown right into the fire. And I think you can look at this in two ways. You can look at this as maybe like it's an immediate gut reaction to the Legend situation. Like Alluka saw what happened with Legend in Vancouver. He's like, yeah, I don't want that to happen to me. So I'm going to take a chill pill for a little bit, keep trying to get better in challengers. And then if the time comes this year, I'll be ready. If not, I'll be under contract with FaZe for the following campaign, seemingly, allegedly, potentially. Um, or you can it's just genuine. He like wants to get better, and I think that based on what we've seen from him, if it has not, I would be surprised if it had nothing to do with what's gone on with Legend. Like I feel like at least 1% of that decision had to be like he saw what's going on there and is like, okay, I'm gonna pump the brakes a little bit here. Um, but as long as that's not the overwhelming component to his decision, I feel like if it's just from a genuine place of he just wants more time in challengers, he's still a young kid, not even from the US, like he still wants to get time to acclimate to everything. Like I think that shows incredible maturity, and that's a really good sign for his potential future development. And because, like we talked about it whenever we talked about the Legend situation. Even Legend said like in one of his tweets or statements or something, it was like, I got the offer and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to turn that down. And we were both like, yeah, well, obviously you're not going to turn that down. But seemingly we don't know what the offer actually was from FaZe, if it was a starting spot immediately or if it just was a sub roster. But there might be a scenario here where Alluka was like, yeah, I'm going to turn down the starting spot. I'll sign as a sub. I think that would be kind of crazy. But if that is the case, it does, in my eyes at least, it shows incredible maturity from a young 18-year-old kid. Um, and it just makes me even more excited for his debut whenever that may be.
Yeah, and we talked about it with Legend that the challengers route can be really beneficial to these guys because they play with more veteran players, and the pressure of winning, while it may be high, is not nearly as high as it is when you get to the CDL. And especially in the case of Alluka, if he were to come right in as a starter for FaZe, early January, that's a lot of pressure to put on any player because FaZe is obviously one of the top 4 teams in the league and expected to be a championship contender. And not saying that Alluka couldn't rise to the occasion, but even Hydra, who's one of the best COD players that we've had over the last 5-6 years, he spent some time in challengers before he came up to New York. And it worked out. Like, even I Simp was a different beast altogether, but I feel like it's also a different era in Call of Duty where Simp could basically be practicing as if he were a pro before he became a pro officially, whereas Alluka, he gets kind of that with the challenger stuff, but if the pressure isn't on him entirely, I think that's probably a good thing, especially with him so young, and probably got to learn quite a bit before he gets up to FaZe. And that it might not even be that long, to be honest, because depending on how FaZe does over the next few weeks, and depending, I guess, on Alluka's visa and what happens there, he could be in by the end of the month. So we'll see what happens with it. I think it's really interesting, and I'm very happy that he found a home in FaZe. It is very odd, I will say, that LAT did not seem to be super interested, reportedly. It didn't seem like they were kind of jumping on the bandwagon, which I think is really interesting because FaZe, while they haven't looked great in the early part of the season, does not seem to be in as much trouble, in my opinion, as LAT will probably be within the next few months. And missing out on a player like Alluka seems like kind of a missed opportunity for LAT. I don't know if you feel similarly.
I thought that was the, most natural fit, just given everything we've talked about around Kenny and the roster construction for LAT and everything like that. I'm not entirely surprised that LAT would, and I think, again, you can look at this multiple ways, but like I'm not entirely surprised LAT would want to stick with Kenny as opposed to just like cutting him loose after 3 weeks and going with an unproven rookie. Like I don't know. I feel like they have the talent, obviously, to succeed with a player like Kenny at this current point in his career, as well as the talent to succeed with a player of Alluka. Like, even if Alluka comes in and struggles for a little bit off the rip, like it's statistically shouldn't be that much different than Kenny when Kenny's struggling. So it's got to be, call from the higher ups, maybe, Kenny's legacy with LAT, or the guys just really believe in him and want to stick with him, want to they value his leadership and what he brings to the table in that regard. I don't really know, but Aches was going on a bit of a generational run there on some streams and talking with Scrap and stuff, and he always says, like, you get the chance to pack a punch your roster, you always do it, and this might be a case where, a couple months down the road, maybe we're looking back, if LAT doesn't see as much success as people were expecting some from this roster, maybe they have some regrets in that regard, but if this team still succeeds, then it won't be too much of an afterthought. I think it's an interesting scenario, though, for a team like LAT with so much talent and so much potential to just be in a spot where it's like we're not seemingly going to consider this. But again, we heard from Rafi before the holidays and everything that at least 6 teams reached out about Alluka. So it's very possible that LAT did. There was even a clip I saw. Octane said that he shot a text out, and I think he was implying that he texted Nade shot. I'm not sure. He never like explicitly said who he texted, but Octane was basically like he contacted someone at LAT to try and be like, yeah, we should maybe give this kid a look. So it's very possible LAT reached out and just lost a potential bidding war for a substitute, which I don't know how that would work. And yeah, without knowing too much information, it's all, kind of weird to speculate on. But all we know now is that FaZe Alluka is locked in for this year. I am interested what the contract situation is, just if it is like he's signed only for this year and then he's potentially a free agent at the end of next year, or if he's like signed beyond this year. That would make the most sense from FaZe, but does that make the most sense for Alluka as an individual to lock himself to a team? I don't know. Maybe it actually does because of like the visas and stuff, like being locked up in the contract with FaZe might allow like the visa process to go longer and let him stay in the US longer. I don't really know. There's a lot of variables for this whole situation.
Yeah, and I want to think. I think we should switch to kind of a related thing because you mentioned Octane. We've talked about Legend a little bit, and that situation has been very odd to watch.
Yeah.
So on the first, it's announced that Legend, who had been benched by the Vancouver Surge and became a member of the Stallions Challengers roster, it was announced on the first that he was stepping away due to personal reasons and that Stallions would be using an emergency substitute and that it would be Octane, which was like, okay, that's weird. So one, obviously the emergency substitute, having to come in due to Legend stepping out, right off the bat, want to wish him the best. Hopefully everything is all good. But then it started to kind of unravel. Face It was basically saying that they didn't have a legitimate reason to have this emergency substitute and that they would have to play with the roster that they said they would, which when they played the last Challengers Cup, it was Encourage, Swooty, Legend, and Havoc. And so Octane couldn't play reportedly, and then Legend was apparently in the country still, even though there were people who were saying that he was out of the country. I don't really know exactly what to do with all of this information. What do you think about this kind of saga that we're seeing with Legend and Stallions? And is he here? Is he not? It's just kind of a weird situation from my point of view.
Yeah, I was watching Zuma's stream for a little bit yesterday, trying to, get as much info as I could. And it sounds like it was kind of like a mental health thing. Like Legend just wanted to go back home, leave the U.S., and forget about COD for a little bit, get a little mental reset in. And then this whole like they very briefly brought Octane in for scrims, and he was fine a little bit. I saw some good clips out of him, and then they brought somebody else in. I think it was like Heisers, Heis, something like that. So Octane, I don't think was even going to play in this tournament qualifier thing if Legend wasn't able to. It was kind of like a very brief fill-in situation for scrims at that time when this Legend situation first started. But I mean, first off, that's just like Havoc and Octane playing together in Challengers in 2026. Like that's something I didn't have on my bingo card. That's just something funny to even think about, even for how brief it was. But on the Legend front, yeah, it's been a weird situation. Obviously, wishing him the best, and it makes total sense to me if he's just like, this whole COD thing at the start has been really taking a toll on him, and he wants to just get a little break and go back, see some family and stuff. Like, makes total sense to me. So wishing him the best. But yeah, I don't know what the deal is with like I guess if it's legitimately like what I'm thinking is it's like that's the excuse that Stallions provided to Face It, and Face It's like, yeah, we don't care about him wanting to go back home. He's on the roster. He's got to play. It's kind of weird, but it does make a little bit of sense just in terms of it's not like, at least seemingly it's not like a family member died or something like that. It's literally more of like, he just wants to leave, and Face It's like, no, he can leave after this tournament and then you can find someone to fill in his shoes. So I don't know. It is definitely a bit of a weird one. Obviously, I think there was a clip that I saw from Formal, like just talking about the situation, saying that he talked to Legend, and I know Zuma's been constantly talking to him, seeing clips and stuff. So Legend's got some people with experience, like in his corner, being there for support and stuff like that. And the Formal clip, he said that Legend seemed pretty stressed, and the Formal says the COD community can be overwhelming, especially from the Halo community, which is much smaller. Um, so it's good. I like that. Obviously, Formal and Legend being former teammates, like Legend having the ability to talk to someone like Formal, who's maybe not gone through this exact thing, but he's at least gone through the being in there, the situation of transitioning from Halo to COD. Like having him should help through all this. But yeah, I mean that's all it seems like to me. Is it's just like Legend wants a break. Face it, didn't want to give him a break right now, so he's got to play in this tournament. So hopefully, for the Stallions and stuff, that these boys can qualify for their elite. Legend can go take his break or whatever. They get somebody to fill in, and then hopefully we see Legend back at some point playing again later this year.
I've seen people giving face it shit about this, and I'm not going to defend them on 99% of like what goes on with the challenger stuff and how disorganized everything is. I will say in this instance, or in any instance where it's like, well, we need an emergency sub, it's like challengers rosters change so much, and many of those reasons are not legitimate. Many of those reasons are like, we just want this guy and we don't want that guy, and it's very reasonable to think that you're lying, or even if you're not lying, we have to kind of set a precedent of like, we're not just going to let people make emergency subs anytime they want to change their roster after the roster lock. I totally get that. I don't think that the criticism levied against them in this particular case is warranted in any respect. That being said, I completely understand why Legend would be like, I just really don't want to deal with this shit right now.
Yeah.
He probably had a very different idea of how this would go. This is not, if Halo was, having a season this year and there was a competitive scene that they could have events with and a world championship with, I'm sure he would not even be anywhere near Call of Duty. It is just something that he's doing to kind of pass the time and maybe make a career out of it. But he couldn't have foreseen how badly things would have gone over just 2 weeks of play, and then whatever happened after that. Excuse me. So it's a really bad situation for him. Hopefully, he comes back and wants to play, and I have no doubts that he will get a chance if he wants to play, because his point situation makes him very attractive
Yeah.
for most teams anyway. So, that's kind of a good thing, is that he could take, weeks off, a month off or whatever, and still come back and have more points than anybody else in challengers, unless another CDL pro gets dropped down. So, yeah, it's a weird situation, but hopefully it works out the best for everyone involved. Anything else on challengers or any other non-wish list stuff you want to talk about before we get into it?
I just saw Telluride Bush lost yesterday to somebody in the elite, and I know. So as far as I know, it's like a 2-day thing, and like yesterday was if you win 2 matches, you're automatically in. If you lose one, you got to play again today. So they're playing at some point today, I'd imagine, to get in. So that's of note, just because the Bush have been a pretty big talking point in challengers and whatnot. So. Any Barstool/Bush fans, that's something to keep an eye on later.
According to COD Gamepedia, the teams that have already qualified: Phantoms roster, Huntsman, which is Renegade's team, Omit Brooklyn, which is Alluka, Brackfellow, and Nate, Next Threat Black, which is Diamond Constandi, Ojani, and Exceed, coached by Mark AB, which is interesting. Falcons Academy White, King of Bodhi, Arstees, Paul Alex Priesta, Five Fears, which has Eric Boom and Rex on the team. P7 Notorious, Ulysses, Turiel, Awakening, and Geo, and Falcons Academy, which is Roxas, Asim, Manny. And then there's 4 other teams that are still yet to qualify. So, like you were saying, Telluride Bush, who won the most recent Challengers Cup and the first one as well, even though it's a different roster now with TJ not on the team. So Stallions, both Stallions teams. There's another Next Threat team, which is Sensor
So they
Knees.
played each other yesterday when I was watching Zuma's stream. They were like, it was Next Threat whatever versus Next Threat Sensors team, and that was to qualify. So that means obviously Sensor lost yesterday against his other Next Threat team, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, so if Next Threat wins and Cabal Esports wins, that's Geo Frosty's team. Then they'll play for a qualifying spot. It seems like they're kind of like in the semifinals right now of the losers bracket, so they have to win 2 matches to qualify. So if you're interested and you're watching live, you could tune in to. I'm sure most of these guys are streaming. I would hope. It would seem reasonable to stream. I'm sure Sensor's streaming. If there's anybody that's streaming out of this group, he's probably streaming it. But yeah, that's obviously huge. The Elite is probably the most important thing for the Challengers guys because it gives them regular matches against like really high level opponents, and it's quite a bit of money that they don't have to grind for like an entire weekend for. So interesting. Don't know what Legend is, or what team Legend will join after he comes back, but we'll see what happens with that.
I just checked Bush Gaming Twitter too. They tweeted 30 minutes ago that they'll be live at 5:30 Central, so 6:30 Eastern for. I would assume they're doing a watch party, and then obviously the players are probably streaming. But they tweeted actually it's a helpful graphic. That's just a simple bracket, a 14 bracket. You'd think like this is like a no-brainer for anybody to post that, but it shows who they play and what they got to do. So just Bush got to win 2 series today to get in, and yeah. So anybody who's listening live or after the fact, it won't matter actually. So it'll be done if you're listening after the live show. But anyone live, a couple hours from now, Challenger qualifiers for Elite will continue.
Yeah, if Stallions and Stallions Black both win their matches, they play each other for Elite
Ooh.
qualification. So Zuma will be stressed out. So yeah, let's talk about our wish list, our New Year's resolutions. We did this again, like I said, last year, and we didn't reflect back on like what actually went on with that, as is tradition with all New Year's resolutions. I think you forget about them after a week, and then it's like, all right, it was nice when it lasted. But yeah, we're going to go through each of the 12 CDL teams. We each wrote down something, sometimes more specific, sometimes more general with these teams, kind of what we wish to see for them, or maybe a New Year's resolution for them. Typically we're trying to make them better, trying to help them out. But things kind of get a little bit messy, and we might say something about the CDL if we have time. There's quite a few wish lists and or wishes and New Year's resolutions I have for the CDL itself, but
I was looking at our list from last year, and I honestly, like, for the CDL specific stuff, the stuff that I had in the notes from last year was better comms from the CDL. And I feel like, to an extent, we at least got that early on this year with like releasing the schedule and now it's the complete schedule, but at the time, 95% of the schedule being released very early ahead of time. I thought that was interesting. And then the second thing we had was more map pool changes beyond Hacienda, just because that was the one map pool change at the start of the year. And this year we've obviously had the Blackheart situation, but we also had the communication that there wouldn't be any map pool changes until after Major 1. So again, that kind of ties into that first thing. And then the other two were address expansion, which that just hasn't happened. So I guess that's the one thing that would be there. And then trying out previously GA'd weapons after or if they get nerfed. That's just another thing that seemingly won't happen. But, 2 for 4 at least on those things, I think, from last year, kind of from the CDL wish list. They kind of came true. So that's better than nothing.
Yeah, I mean, all of those seemed I would say the Hacienda one was the most realistic of the group, and the fact that they were better in their communication is a huge plus for everybody.
Yeah.
Um, they've been more forthcoming. I wish they were more forthcoming with like specific decisions at times. But the like the schedule, like you mentioned, was huge, and hopefully that is just like what we can come to expect of the CDL now moving forward. And we're not waiting until October to hear what is going to happen in January. That just seems kind of like a silly thing that we were getting used to for years. But yeah, let's talk about these wish lists. I think it's best if we start from the bottom and work our way up. So starting with the current 12th place team, the Vancouver Surge. So they are 0-3 to this point. They have not won a map. The only team in the CDL not to have a map win heading into the break. They're 0-9 in map count. And of course, we talked about it. Lqgend benched from the roster, bringing in TJ. Did they announce that officially, or we're still waiting on the announcement?
Yeah, it's been announced by everybody but Vancouver, as far as I know.
Yeah, he's not playing with Telluride Bush. He hasn't been for weeks. It doesn't make any sense why they're waiting, but here we are. So TJ's coming into this roster reportedly, and we talked about it at the time. They should be better with TJ because TJ is the better CDL player right now than Lqgend is. That does not make this team that much better in the sense that they're most likely going to be in the losers bracket in Major 1. They are, even after Major 1, I don't foresee them being particularly competitive like immediately. I don't think like once the Major 2 qualifiers start, they're going to be, like a 6th, 7th place team. I think it's going to be pretty gradual. There's a lot of young guys on this team. They still have to figure out how they want to play with each other. Gwen has been the only kind of really bright spot on this team so far. So I'm not exactly sure what to really expect of them, but my wish for them is stick to developing your guys. Obviously, this would have been, I wouldn't have been as kind of like pointed, I guess, if the stuff with Lqgend didn't happen, because if you want to hear us kind of rant about that situation, then just go back a few episodes. We were very clear on how we felt about that, but I think it's still really important that they stick with these guys. There's a reason that when you pick up these 19, 20, 21-year-old or just like these first or second year CDL players, it is important that you stick with them and you support them and you're okay with them making mistakes, especially when you didn't get any guys that would be considered vets or any considered like leaders. Even Gwen, who's the most veteran player before TJ obviously was the most veteran player, no one ever was like confused about him being a leader necessarily or like this vocal leader. That's what Slasher was there for. So yeah, my wish for Vancouver in 2026 is stick to developing your guys, let them grow, let them make mistakes, and hopefully it works out for you. What did you have?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one given the fact that they aren't sticking with Lqgend.
Yeah.
But yeah, for me, I plain and simple, I put win a map. Only team that hasn't won a map yet in the CDL. So um, as historic and funny as it would be if there was a team to go a whole year without winning a map, like even the all Saudi team was able to take a map here and there last year. So I don't think this will go on too long. I especially expect with TJ coming into the fold that this team should in theory be better at search and destroy, and that's always one that they could probably steal a search from a couple of these teams towards the bottom as well. If somebody on Surge just gets hot and has a hot start to an S&D, they ride that into a map win there. They had the pre-existing chemistry with Gwen and TJ playing together previously, so Yeah, that's what I'm going to be looking at for these guys. See if they can get one on the board and see if they can create any momentum from that. Like you said, definitely not expecting like a super drastic results with TJ coming to the fold. Although TJ, in his own right, was absolutely frying in challengers and playing very well. So it's possible that he could be like just you know injecting some fresh blood into the squad, and that's the shot in the arm that these boys need. I don't really know, but um, yeah, I think baby steps right now for this squad, and first step is getting that first map win on the board.
Yeah, it's really, I mean, people will put their New Year's resolutions as like lose 20 pounds or whatever. Sometimes it's good to lose half a pound, and that's really what Vancouver needs to do here. They just need to take a few steps outside the kitchen, maybe do a sit up or two. That's really all we're asking for Vancouver. Like they're definitely going to win a map, but will they win a match in these qualifiers? Like they play Boston this or next weekend. That seems to be their most winnable match left because then they play Optic at the end of the week. They play Miami next week, which okay, Miami maybe, and then that's the only match they have that week. And then the final week they play the very last match of the qualifiers against FaZe. So like they really could just end up going 0-7 with these
Yeah.
qualifiers, and that's not a great place to be in.
I will say we've seen Optic lose to the 12th place team as recently as the start of last season, so it's never out of the question for something super weird to happen like that.
Yeah, Carolina, they are in 11th place technically. They're also winless. I almost said undefeated, but that would be crazy. They're 0-2. They have a 1-6 map count, so pretty definitively the second worst team so far. No other team in the league has worse than a 6-8 map count, which is pretty interesting. I think that it's only these two teams that are just like really dragging things down. But yeah, Carolina. I just said hope things end better than last year. Obviously, things have not started off particularly well for them, but if they have the inverse of what last season was, when they barely could win a match, in the last month and a half of the season, but they were pretty competitive in the first few months of the season, I think that's a win. There's got to be a lot of things that fall into place for that to happen. This is a much more inexperienced team than what they had last year. They also don't have Gwyn, which he's a superstar kind of player. They don't seem to have that this year. Slasher is Slasher, and I don't really know what to expect. Like he has like these breakout performances. It's going to be hard for him to sustain that, especially with a lot of young guys. So I'm just looking for, I guess, more gradual improvement and then just finish the season strong. What do you have for Carolina?
Yeah, I will say I thought it was weird looking at the standings. They're the only team that only played 2 matches. Um, so that they are winless like Vancouver, but they have only played 2 series, which is just like Falcons have played 4. Almost every other team has played 3, I believe. Yeah, so Falcons played 4, every other team played 3, and then Carolina played 2. So that means Carolina has more opportunity over the next 3 weeks to pick things up a little bit. And I saw on Twitter there was one of the like clipped accounts or whatever was tweeting screenshots of scrims, and I saw some scrim screenshots from Carolina. I don't think it was against Bush, but it might have been. But it was against a good challengers team, and Carolina, like they were winning the maps, which is obviously what you'd expect. And you can't gain a ton of info just from the screenshots, but from the
Mhm.
scoreboard screenshots that I saw, that it was the other guys, like the young guys on Carolina towards the top, which I think that's obviously an important element to this Carolina team. If they're going to see success, they want to see what they have in their young guns and uh, go from there. So that's what I put was you need to get a good evaluation of the rookie talent that you have on this team so that you can make decisions about where you're going to go and not hasty decisions necessarily like Vancouver pivoting off Legend so quickly, but especially since they only have 2 matches played so far. They have some time to get a good sample size here and see, like, do we want to continue to develop our young guys? Maybe that results in Slasher getting benched or something, and they bring somebody else in to try and build for the future, or they think that this team has the potential to cause some upsets, cause some chaos, and they stick with it and ride it out and see what they have. So um, I'll just be interested to see a little bit more of this Carolina team because obviously, like you said, it's a slow start so far, even though it's only been 2 matches.
Yeah, Lurks is 19, Craze is 21. Nero, even he's been in the league multiple
Yeah.
years now. He's only 23. So like, there's a lot of youth, and obviously with Lurks and Craze in particular, a lot of inexperience with them that hopefully just reps in the CDL. We talked about it with Vancouver, and that's why we said for a while it was like it only makes sense to make a decision on that roster after like major 2. Let them get like 16, 17 online matches, hopefully, more than just 2 offline matches under their belt, and then you can kind of make a determination. I think it's going to be kind of a similar situation with Carolina, especially with Lurks and Craze, although we've seen Carolina be more ready to make roster changes in the past. Like even when they were kind of winning and maybe limping along with Vivid, they make that change and it's like, yeah, that didn't really work out. Like it backfired spectacularly, and then they don't even end up making no, they made champs, but they were just absolutely dumpstered and by far the worst team at the event. So like, you gotta be patient, I think, with Carolina. But we'll see what happens. I really don't know what's going to go down with that team.
Yeah, I was really thinking about Lurks and Craze there when talking about like evaluating the quote unquote rookie talent because
Mm-hmm.
obviously they're the rookies. But I do pointing out since you mentioned Nero, this is really the first time we've seen Nero in a non SMG specific role because he's playing the flex in the second AR for this team. And we know what he's capable of from an SMG perspective. I've sung his praises enough over the years, and I really just think consistency has been the biggest thing for him because he has the potential to have those maps where he goes like 40 and 30, 70 engagements, and he also has the potential to have those maps where he's like 25 and 40, where he's getting the engagements, he's just not getting the kills. So, um, maybe more time with the AR role could be beneficial to him, makes him a more versatile player in the long term. That'll be something to keep an eye on too.
Next up, we have Minnesota. They are currently tied for 8th place. It's a 3-way tie, Cloud9, Miami, and G2 Minnesota. But they have the worst map count of those 3 teams. They have a 6 and 8 map count, 1 and 2 match count. Pretty interesting start to the season, I would say, for this team. I was not really sure what to expect because obviously they had the great preseason cup performance, and so did Carolina. So there was kind of like maybe these 2 teams could be something. Maybe they could compete for like a regular winners bracket spot at these majors. They started off, Minnesota did, with a Game 5 win over Cloud9. Then they lose to Optic as expected. Then they lose to Game 5, a classic for G2, for Minnesota, I should say. They lose 3-2 to Boston in their only match of the final week. So they'll have a few matches. I think their schedule is a lot more simple than both Vancouver and Carolina. They should be able to get into the winners bracket with this kind of schedule. Granted, this is not a championship level team, and that's kind of what dooms a lot of these teams is they are just not consistent enough to pull off wins against the teams that they quote unquote should beat. I really didn't have anything for Minnesota. I could not really think of anything that wasn't particularly mean because there's one weak point on the team that I have been very vocal about, and that is Skies. And I don't believe in him as like the AR on this team. but we talked about it when they announced the roster. They don't have a ton of options. The one thing maybe that I could say is really be scouting challengers, and if there is, obviously Alluka would have been like a godsend for this kind of team, but I think that was always out of their price range if I had to be honest about it. But hopefully you find an AR or just somebody on in the challenger circuit that you feel can be of use to you, because I think 3/4 of this team is really interesting and very promising. And the potential of this team is relatively high for what we've seen of Minnesota the last few years, where they're kind of like a lower tier team. They don't really compete on a regular basis. So what do you think for Minnesota? Because I think this is one of the more interesting rosters that we have in the CDL. It's very hard to kind of get a sense of where they are in relation to some of these other teams.
Yeah, I honestly had a tough time thinking of something for Minnesota too. So I actually find a way to break the Minnesota Game 5 curse. But obviously they have won a Game 5 this year, but it's just they need to get some 3-0s or
Stop going to Game
victory
5.
series. Yeah, exactly. So that was a little bit of a not totally serious one, but I just put one in there for you because you didn't have one, and one I just thought of just the Mamba Rookie of the Year campaign. That's got to be like the main thing so far for Minnesota, and doing whatever this team can to further that is in the best interests of the team and obviously the players involved, because if Mamba's frying, obviously that most likely means the team is seeing more success than potentially some people expected.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just good for the brand. And if he eventually wins Rookie of the Year, that's good for him and his stock going forward, yada yada. So yeah, I think I've talked about Estriel a lot. I'm excited to see him continue to develop as a pro. I think Kremp has just kind of been one of those guys he's one of the newer players in the CDL in recent years, but he's one of those guys who, like, he'll have his pop off moments, but it feels like he's never at the top of any lists for anything. He kind of just like exists as a CDL pro, and that's
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily a bad thing or anything, but that's just kind of my feeling on him. So maybe look for him to take the next step, and that could potentially be a good thing for Minnesota. But yeah, I think a Mamba Rookie of the Year campaign has got to be like at the top of the list for Minnesota fans and the organization as a whole, because if that comes to fruition, that should mean it's overall been a decently successful season.
And we've seen, a lot of the Rookie of the Year campaigns, successful campaigns that we've seen over the years, that typically means that their team is a champs team.
Yes.
Gwyn with Carolina was kind of like the only one where I was like, I guess like he just that was also a really weak. We typically have weak rookie slates, but it was like him or Abuza, or I think Estriel kind of was in on it too. So I don't really know, but if Mamba does turn out to be Rookie of the Year, that's only can mean good things for Minnesota and their prospects this season. We saw it with Miami. Having two Rookie of the Year candidates was very beneficial to that team and their success, even though they probably didn't end up where they wanted to be. But they're our next team on our list is Miami. I think both of us are kind of on the same wavelength with this team. It's just be patient with Trakes, kind of let him, work, just try to get him to be in the best possible position, make him comfortable. Granted, Miami, I did think about when I put it down, Miami has a really good track record with identifying talent. So if they see someone out there and they're like, he could be better than Trakes, I just follow your gut instinct, because that's kind of worked for Miami very well to this point in the CDL. They've been able, they got Real, even though he wasn't like a homegrown prospect or anything, but we didn't really get to see much of him against CDL level talent when he was with Carolina, and they took the risk of waiting it out with his visa issues, and then it turned out to be a really great pickup for them. And then obviously last year having two of the top 3 or 4 rookies in the league on your team, they were probably like the fifth best team in the league by the end of the season. So I think Trake's just patience, development, just making sure, kind of what we talked about with Vancouver, just like stick with him and hopefully develop him into something that you can really be proud of at the end of the day. Any other kind of notes that you want to put on the Miami train?
Yeah, I think just on the patience front, like literally the guy that Trakes was replacing is Real, and that was kind of the deal when Real first joined this Miami team. Like it
Yeah.
wasn't all sunshines and rainbows right away, but then as that's like he was a late move, and they slowly built up good chemistry to become like a much better team by the end of the season. And this position with Trakes being here at the start of the season, like they have a lot more time to build that chemistry and get to a good place with that. So I think that's just especially what we saw the first 2 weeks. It seemed pretty evident to me in Miami's first match against Toronto, I believe. Like they
Mm-hmm.
got dominated in that one hard point. It was like 130-0 or something like that, I believe, at one point. Like it felt like pretty obvious to me that with the whole visa situation and stuff, Miami just didn't have the practice reps together. But then going into the second week, it was like, okay, they got a week more of practice together. It felt like Miami was, you know, slowly showing signs of being more practiced and just having more reps together and stuff like that. So I think that's honestly this break, depending on how Miami chose to utilize it, if they all went home to their families and stuff, obviously that's their right and everything like that. But if these guys like stuck to it and kept grinding over this break and played together more, like that could really bode well for, just getting them sort of on the same wavelength as some of these teams that didn't have the same visa issues that Miami had early this year. So I think that's just uh, my train of thought with Miami is just keep getting those reps in, keep working with Trakes, and we know what the potential of the other guys on the team is and what this squad could be. So just, if you keep putting in the work, I only see this squad getting better.
Yeah, so they're 1-2 and then 7-8 in map count, and that's because they've gone to Game 5 in all three of their series so far. They lost 3-2 to Toronto, 3-2 to Optic, and then they beat Cloud9 3-2. I mean, stop going to Game 5 is kind of like that should be a New Year's resolution for every one of these teams, because you're just putting yourself at risk a lot of times. Like, granted, if you're a really bad team and you could barely win matches, like prolong it as much as you can, because sometimes those Game 5s, like the Game 5 luck, comes back around and it does help you. But for Miami, they really needed to beat C9. Like that would have been a really catastrophic loss for them to go 0-3 to start the season. Even though I think they have a very winnable rest of their schedule. They play Carolina, Vancouver, Boston, and in Paris to end. So Paris is like by far the hardest match left on their schedule. But if they had gone 0-3 to start, it's like, I mean, we're looking at like a 3-4 major one qualifier slate, which is sometimes dicey depending on the tiebreakers and stuff. So they really, really need to stop going to Game 5s, especially with inferior talent. And I think part of that is Trakes is just, he's so green. He didn't ostensibly did not get a ton of time in the country to practice with his team, which probably changed how they were able to practice and what quality of practice that they got. So hopefully they were able to get more practice in, and I don't want to say hopefully he didn't go home over the holidays, but I do kind of hope like he didn't have a bunch of issues getting back into the country, because who knows with what's going on in the world, that you just don't want to risk it with these teams, especially these international teams like Miami. So hopefully everything works out with them, and I have full faith that things will work out, because Miami is kind of like Toronto, even though they're in a kind of a war right now. But Toronto for a long time was very good at just identifying these European guys, bringing them over, and then they just turn out to be like incredible. Like they identified Kleenex as like a superstar, and then he was like, yeah, he is a superstar. They identified Insight as like a midseason pickup. It worked out. Even a guy like Joe DeCeves, who had a lot of talent and was certainly like a up and coming player on LAT, they saw him as like a potential superstar, and I mean it's kind of worked out in their favor to this point. And then the other team that we have in this three-way tie is C9. So obviously they lost to Miami. They are 1-2 on the season and 7-6 in map count. So they lost to Minnesota in Game 5. Then they beat Vancouver 3-0 and then lost in Game 5 to Miami. They have a ridiculously hard rest of their schedule. Or these next two matches are ridiculously hard because they play Paris and then they play Vegas. So not something that I really would look forward to if I was C9. Especially because we talked about it with them as like the beginning of the season is probably going to be pretty important for this team, and they just did not really get the luck with the schedule with playing Miami, Paris, and FaZe in the first 5 matches of the season. That being said, I think for me, it's my wish for them is just stick to a lane. Just pick a lane and stick to it, whether that's this all-veteran roster where you're not really taking any risks on any guys. It's just, the risk is that you're bringing guys that were already CDL pros and you're trying to give them another chance, but they didn't go for like a young challengers player who hasn't really been able to prove it or anything. They've gone for a guy like Afro who, has shown some like really bright spots as a pro, but it's been hit or miss since then. Bean's kind of similar, is like he's been in the CDL for a while now, but he's never hit it. Vivid, we've talked about like the stats aren't there, but like he is like a winning player, and Mac has been kind of up and down between the CDL and challengers. So they didn't take any risks on any challengers guy, which I don't agree with because I don't think this roster has like a super high ceiling. But if you're going to pick a roster like this, stick to it and just keep going with it. Let it kind of play its way out. If at any point you're like, we need to kind of switch gears, then switch gears and stick to that. Whether that's bringing in a whole new challengers roster and trying to go with them. I would love for them to try the thing that we talked about over the off season. It's like pick up a whole challengers team and be like, here you go. Like, this is what we're doing. You have to stick to it, because if not, then I think you're just kind of going half in, half out, and it's not going to work. And it's just probably going to end up with a really disappointing season for C9, which for an organization like that, they deserve better, or I guess they don't deserve better because they haven't put in the effort to do that. But I would just like to see more from them. So what do you think for C9 and their either New Year's resolution or their wish?
Yeah, I think in terms of the roster stuff you were talking about, just important to keep in mind, we had the leaks of the salaries and everything like that in the report early on that potentially Cloud9 could have the least expensive roster in CDL history. So regardless of what is true or not among all those leaks and reports, there is at least the notion or thought that Cloud9 might not be willing to spend a ton of money on this roster. And I feel like that's the most likely case here, is that this is just the squad that Cloud9 has for the year. That's like the vibe that I've had this entire time with this team. And that's what I've felt like is why part of my preseason evaluation was I honestly thought this team would be one of those squads that could be sneaky good early on, kind of like Carolina last year, and then maybe like teeter off as the season progresses and as other teams improve. So that's why I put just don't hit your ceiling too early. Like get this squad, they got to keep being frisky and try and cause some upsets here and there, and try to continue to improve as the rest of the league inevitably improves with more time as well. But I do think Afro is just the key for this Cloud9 roster. I think he's by far the best player on the team and has the most potential to be the best player on this team. And in his return to the CDL, it's important for him to show that and showcase that he belongs, so that he's not in another similar situation to like last year where he's just wasting away in challengers, and then because of the visa process and everything like that, it's just a full year he's unable to get into the league. So he has to put on a show this year to ensure his long-term uh, future in the CDL, assuming that's what he wants to do. So Yeah, I think that's my general vibe with Cloud9. I feel like this is the fourth man squad we're going to see for a majority of the year. Just what can they do to maximize this squad's potential and get the best out of Afro and each individual, and I mean, there have been moments, and I think Afro, I'd have to look back in the notes, but I'm pretty sure Afro has one of the highest kills performances in a hard point this year. Beans was looking pretty good with the sniper in S&D, and we know what Vivid and Mac can do in S&D in particular as well too. So like, I like this squad as a team that, like, I'm not picking them to win a championship, but I'm not surprised if they go on like a top 6 run or maybe even make a championship Sunday, just like by causing some chaos or something like that. I'm not, I wouldn't be betting a ton of money on them to do it, but I wouldn't be surprised at the end of the day if they somehow pulled it off. As opposed, I feel like other people just completely write them off and don't even give a second thought to that. But maybe I'm just crazy. So, regardless of what you think of this team, I think it's just important for them to not max out this early in the season. Like, continue to improve, do what you got to do the little things to be that squad that can maybe cause those upsets.
It really, for them, what they should be hoping for is like, let's just beat the teams that are like the bottom 4 teams, like, consistently. And because that adds up, we saw it with Boston last year in particular, where Boston had like, they could get the upset over an Optic or an LAT or a FaZe, but most of the time it was they were just like consistent. They could beat Carolina, especially toward the end of the season. They could beat a Minnesota. They could beat these teams that probably weren't going to be super competitive, and it worked out very well for them. They were able to make champs, and for C9, for a lot of these bottom 4 or 5 teams currently, that is the best case scenario for them, really, is make champs, maybe win a match or maybe 2 at champs, get top 6, and kind of call it a day. And that really is like the best outcome for a lot of these teams, unfortunately. Falcons is a little bit different. They are in, I think that's 7th place currently in the CDL. So they're 2-2. They have a 7-7 map count. They had a really bad preseason. We were thinking maybe they're going to be horrible, considering they were the only team to lose to a challengers team. So they were swept by Optic to start. Then they lost 3-1 to LAT. They bounced back in the second week. They 3-0 Carolina, 3-1 against Boston. The Boston one's more interesting to me personally, just because Boston, was pretty competitive. They beat Minnesota, they beat Carolina, and then for the Falcons to come in and beat Boston, I think it was pretty good for them. That being said, like, I have no clue what the ceiling of this team is, because both Exnid and Kismet have not performed particularly well to start this season. I just don't think that Exnid is probably going to be like a CDL player long term, but I would probably say Kismet's been worse so far this year. And that really pains me to say, because like, I think Kiz is awesome, and he definitely just had a horrible season last year with one of the worst teams in the league. But I have no idea what to do with this team long term. So what I said was, find a replacement. Just identify a replacement for either Exnid or Kismet. Like, have someone that you have in mind that is like, they could slot into this roster when they're needed, because that feels like what is going to happen here. Like, if you have Celium, who is reportedly the highest paid player in the CDL, you have Pred, who's definitely one of the highest paid, one of the more popular players, and 2 of the better players in the CDL. Your goal is to win championships, correct? Like, wouldn't that be the idea with signing those guys, is to make this a championship contender? And I just don't think they're anywhere close to that right now. So something has to give in the other half of that team. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I think personally anything with Kismet, obviously it's a small sample size to start the year, but I think Kismet is a really good second SMG player. We saw the highlight of his career being that second SMG running in front of Hydra, baiting for him. I had visions of that being his position with Pred here, and I thought that was kind of comparable and just in a play style perspective of Kismet and Hydra versus Kismet and Pred. But I think that's just been like I feel like Xnid is, if he doesn't take that next step to prove that he belongs in the CDL, that he has to be the move that's addressed if they can find an AR/flex to replace him, and that would be like a 2-person change, with only changing 1 person, because then you get Kisman moving to SMG with Pred, you get a flex in there, and then he's the second AR alongside Celium. So that's what I think is. That's what I would like to see the Falcons do, especially reportedly, allegedly, seemingly spending all this money. They should have the potential to go get somebody who could be like a top flex option, but they also seem to want to remain committed to at least having somewhat of a Saudi presence and believing in Xnid and continuing to give him an opportunity. So I'm not going to completely write Xnid off. It seems like he is a part of their plan, regardless of whether it's in the CDL or like even if they were to get somebody, I would be shocked if he wasn't like immediately on one of their academy teams, like still on the bench and whatnot.
Oh, yeah.
Like he's going to be a part of the Falcons no matter what. It's just a question of what his role looks like and if he can continue to if he can produce at the CDL level to match the talent around him on this team and the amount of money being spent on the players around him as well, seemingly, allegedly being spent. So I think that's the biggest thing for Falcons. Like we saw with their schedule early this year, they were not able to compete in week 1 against some of the top teams, but they were able to compete against some of the not top teams in week 2. So that's why I feel like they're a middle of the pack team, and they just have to decide if they want to be the team to win now, which with the amount of money they are seemingly, allegedly, reportedly spending, they want to win now, or if they want to just continue to develop Xnid, which if they want to go down that route, I'm fine with that, but it just doesn't make a ton of sense given how much money they have invested in the players around him. But what do I know?
I just have the fear that Kismet gets dropped and then, Vegas just reaches for, or not Vegas, sorry. The Falcons reach for someone like Arcides, who's like an old, reliable AR player that they don't like, that they all are like kind of familiar with, but obviously doesn't have the talent anymore to like be a championship level team. Like he's not going to make your team into anything special. That's just kind of how I feel about it. Like I'm not saying that it doesn't necessarily have to be Arcides, but if it's Geo, I don't know if like that really changes things for this team. Like I don't know if that moves the needle. Like I think Xnid kind of holds them back as a team, and there's no way to get around that with Falcons, it seems, because like you said, even if Xnid gets benched, he's going to be on the Falcons Academy team. And to me, that shows how committed they are, that they still have a bunch of these Saudi players on the Academy rosters. They have 2 Academy rosters, and I'd say like more than half of those teams are Saudi players, or around half of the teams are Saudi players. And like, to me, that means that they're super committed to this project still. And that scares me because I think this should be a championship level team. Like when you sign Celium, you re-sign Pred, you sign him mid-season last year. You bring in Kismet, another former world champion, champs MVP. You expect this to be a top 4 team. And right now they're in 7th. And I would say that they're not much higher than that. Like even if we did our power rankings today, like they're no higher than like 6th for me. And that's not what you would want from this high, I guess, highly paid of a roster and high caliber of a roster. it just doesn't work. And I don't see them kind of getting out of this. I don't know if there is an AR player like we've talked about many times before. Like there's no perfect solution. The perfect solution was Ghosty, and that's why when he was a free agent, it was like and Vegas was reportedly kind of interested in that idea, and he would certainly have slotted in well in the Kismet spot, but shit happens, and we're looking at Paris, and they're basically what Vegas probably wishes they were right now, and obviously they're not.
They had talks with Sib too, and I think that would have been interesting just because I feel like Sib would have been the main AR, and then Celium would have been on the flex, but yeah, both obviously didn't end up happening for Vegas. I think that was a really good point you just made there. That Gentlemate so far is what Falcons envisioned they would be. That's a really good point.
Next up, we have FaZe Vegas. A lot of FaZe news over the break. Not any like other than Alluka, not much related to FaZe Vegas. But so FaZe is 2-1, sixth place, or they're tied for second place because there's a 5-way tie between Paris, Toronto, LAT, Boston, and FaZe. But FaZe has the worst map count of these 5 teams. They have a 6 and 7 map count. We talked about it. They were swept by LAT. Then they somehow shockingly upset Paris in Game 5 later in the week. And then they beat Toronto in Game 5 of the final match before the break. So a weird way to start, because I would have, if you said that they're 2-1 to start the season, I would 100% have said they beat LAT, they beat Toronto, and they lose to Paris. That did not happen. I would not have bet that they went to Game 5 with 2 of these teams and they got swept by LAT. We obviously know that Alluka is coming, that he is on the bench. He's waiting to kind of come in and be a part of this team. For who is kind of to be determined, I would say, because it seems like everybody's kind of on a tryout right now. Well, not everybody. There's one player that is not on a tryout right now, but we'll see with these other 3. And I think it's like, that's the most interesting part to me. And that's why I said just be in a good place when Alluka comes in, because you don't want to be in complete disarray when your rookie comes in, even though that did work out for United back in the day with Simp, and they were in a really, really bad place. And then he comes in, but I would say that they just need to be relatively stable. They need to be in a good place standings wise when he comes in, that they can actually make a leap, and it's not just like Alluka and company digging out of a hole that they put themselves in early in the season.
Yeah, I think you're talking about the one guy who's not getting replaced here. There've been that the trend now on Twitter. I don't know if you've seen it, but like people like posting pictures and telling Grok to do something, and then they do it. So COD Clip did this one, and it was a picture of the 4 FaZe guys, Draza, Abuza, 04, and Simp. It says, remove the player who's getting dropped for Alluka at Grok, and then Grok responds with the picture, and it's got Draza, Abuza, and 04, so it's implying that you dropped Simp for Alluka, which I thought that was just hilarious. And then it was 04 who 04 tweeted, we didn't know how to tell you at Simp, and Simp just replied GG. So I thought that was funny. But yeah, in all seriousness, I think the Alluka thing, that's just gonna be kind of looming over this team for the entire season if they struggle. Is that like, how is that going to affect some of these players mentally? Like in seriousness, it should be most likely Draza as the target. So like maybe this is just the push that he needs to pick things up. I don't know. But in theory, it could be a change for any of those guys outside of Simp, most likely, and that could be something that affects how they play. I'm not entirely sure, but outside of that, I just think the hard point, it was kind of the thing for FaZe roster last year towards the end of the year, and it's kind of carried over to this year into a small sample size. They got to improve in hardpoint fast. 1-4 in hardpoint so far this year, 4-1 in S&D. That's like, it makes a little bit of sense with the elements of the Vancouver team that they brought in, because that Vancouver team was really good in hardpoint, but that was also in part because of Neptune. But then towards the end of the year, they were starting to improve in S&D, and I thought Abuza in particular was pretty strong at S&D and Champs and EWC. So it makes sense that him coming over to play with Simp and maybe S&D is just going to be their recipe for success for this year. But if FaZe wants to be like that title contender that most people expect them to be, like 1-4 in hardpoint's just not going to cut it. So they got to do whatever they can to improve in hardpoint right now. And then the Alluka stuff, who knows what happens with that, but I feel like it'll take care of itself with time. We'll just have to sit back and wait and see.
Yeah, it really just depends on when that kind of clears up, because if it were just, for example, to clear up near the end of the Major 1 qualifiers and after Major 1, I don't know, it's like a pretty good time to make a change, because then you have 11 qualifying matches to work things out, and then you hopefully are in the top 8, and then you go over to England and, play a tournament. So, I don't know. Abuza can't move to SMG, right? Like, because we already had that experiment in Vancouver. I think anything else is kind of on the table, and obviously Simp's not getting dropped. So, like, the role changes are on the table for most of those guys, or for specifically for 04 and Draza, and a benching or getting dropped is on the table for Draza, 04, or Abuza, and that's a really weird situation to put yourself in as a team, considering they're still one of the top 4 teams and like a championship contender seemingly. But I don't know, it's just a really weird phase era that we're in right now, because we had so much stability over the last like 6 years with them, and now we're talking about after 2 weeks of the CDL season that like they've already signed a player that is essentially like a shadow on this team and just looming over the entire roster for some reason. And it's for a good reason, but still, it's like this is a championship team, and they might be breaking up at some point in the near future. One of these things is not like the other. Optic, Paris, Toronto, LAT, Boston, and FaZe. Our boys, my Breach boys, even though I don't believe in them half of the time, they are currently in 5th place, tied for 2nd in the CDL, 2-1. They have a 7-6 map count. They started off with a 3-1 win over Carolina. They won 3-2 against Minnesota, and then lost 3-1 to Falcons. They have a pretty winnable rest of their schedule in the Major 1 qualifiers: Vancouver, Miami, Cloud9, and then LAT. So very realistic chance to start in the winner's bracket of Major 1. LAT especially is always kind of on upset alert when Boston is hovering around. That just seems to be a match made in hell for the Thieves. But Boston, my thing with them is kind of always the same. Just don't make any changes. You are fine the way you are. You are our perfect low child, and just keep moving through the world as is. My exact words were, keep the squad together and hope for the best. That is my wish for them in 2026. I would assume that's relatively similar to what I said in 2025, because it worked out for them very well in 2025. They got to Champ Sunday, if I'm not mistaken. Or did they get Champ Sunday, or was it EWC? They got to the top 3. I think it was Champs.
No,
right?
it was Champs. They played winners finals against Optic.
Yeah, so I mean, that is literally the best outcome that they could ever hope for, considering this team is a lot of guys that were not wanted by other teams, Cammy and Purge being specifically those guys. I think they're in a really good place. Like, it's not going to be as good as it has been so far this season. That's not going to stay, because they're going to play FaZe and Optic and like a lot of these really good teams, as the schedule gets tougher and kind of goes up and down. But they're doing great right now. So I'm just saying, stick with it and let it ride. and hopefully make champs again and potentially have a shot to pull off an upset or two at champs.
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't know. I think for Boston, it's kind of similar to Cloud9 in the sense where it's just like a question of whether it's going to be a team that's willing to make additional roster moves or if this is just locked in as that squad. But yeah, I think really like what we've seen, how Snoopy is developed over the last year plus. I think very highly of Nasty, especially after his run with Vancouver. I think he just has the potential to be a very complementary piece to another potential star in the sense here of Snoopy continuing to be like that 1A slayer on the team. Nasty can be like a complementary top slayer on a team. We saw that last year with like him being very consistent alongside Neptune, Abuza, and 04 in Vancouver. My questions are just, are Purge and Cammy going to be long-term pieces to continue to develop Snoopy and get the best out of him? It seems like from a chemistry standpoint and everything with the reps that they've now had over 2 years together, it doesn't seem like it's going to be a question of whether they're going to want to move on from them. But I think that's just where my head's at with this team. Is like, that's just got to be the question. I feel like Snoopy and Nasty are locked on this squad 100%, and then maybe it's only like a 90% certainty that Purge and Cammy are locked in here, and maybe that's where they can have some wiggle room and potentially decide if they want to make moves depending on how they're doing throughout the year. So yeah, I would be surprised. I think more likely than not, this team's just sticks, kind of like you said, and hoping for the best. But the only other thing I put down there, 1-3 in S&D so far, small sample size, but if they're going to be like a scrappy team causing some upsets and stuff, obviously S&D is a pretty crucial element to that. So we'll have to see what Boston's able to do to improve in that game mode going forward.
I could be wrong, but I think last year they were best at hardpoint. I think they were like a 55% win percentage in hardpoint, and then like super unpredictable in S&D and control. That is like a recipe for erratic behavior, basically, for CDL teams. Is if you can't consistently win S&Ds, it's like a real crapshoot about like what's going to go on here. And like you said, if they're 1-3, granted, it's 4 maps. Like if they figure out, if they win 2 more maps, then they're 500 in S&D, and like we don't have this discussion. But like if they are like a 40% S&D team, that really complicates things moving forward because they need to beat the teams like they did last year that are in the bottom 4. They need to beat those teams that just don't have a chance at being a contender, and then occasionally get the wins over LAT or Optic or whoever at the top of the standings. And especially when it comes to tournaments, because that is also kind of how they did it, is like they would beat LAT in round 1 of a major, and then like that is extra points added on to it because, one win in a major is more points than just one win in the online qualifiers. So hopefully things kind of work out the same way for them, because I love when Boston is kind of in the mix because they really make it tough on really good teams for whatever reason. Next up, we have LAT. They're also part of this tiebreaker. My thing is simple: have a contingency plan. Alluka was the contingency plan, and it just didn't happen. But they need to have a plan if Kenny does not return to form and does not slot into this roster as cleanly as they probably hoped. Excuse me. I thought it was a risk to get him in the first place in the offseason, considering how poorly of a last season he had. But they're way too talented to not be competitive or be a true championship contender. Not saying that they aren't, but they will know, I think, pretty soon if that's the case. Like if they go to Major 1 and they just get rolled by Paris or Optic or whoever, I think like they'll make a roster change. Like that, like not being competitive with Paris in that online qualifier was kind of like the first step toward, okay, like this cannot happen. Like we cannot just be content to be like the third or fourth best team in the league. Like we actually want to win a championship, especially with how badly the season ended last year. So my thing is have a contingency plan in case Kenny is not the guy that you need him to be. What's yours?
Yeah, honestly, this is really the last team. I think it's pretty clear cut right now. At least the top of the standings. Like these other teams, I don't have really anything too outside the box for in terms of wish lists or resolutions. But LAT is like the last top team that um I have a concern of at this current point, and it's Kenny. I don't want to keep harping on it. I know a lot of people have been, but I think like when we were talking about Alluka, it's become pretty clear that at least at this point they don't plan on replacing Kenny. So if they're not going to do that, they just have to find the way that the system, the way of playing that's going to work best so that he's just not a liability. And that's not saying Kenny's always a liability or anything like that, but it's like whatever's been going on really the last year, dating back to the beginning of last season for Kenny, and he had some decent moments with Minnesota at the end of last year. But the start of the season last year with Optic and the start of the season this year so far, like there have been so many things that have just raised questions about him. And before the start of last year, we were talking about Kenny as one of the all-time greats in Call of Duty after winning champs with Optic as the first part of Optics back-to-back over the last 2 years. So it's crazy how fast these talking points and stuff can change with a guy like Kenny, but it's really it's kind of just concerning. And like with Scrap, Hydra, and Abizi, they have the potential to all take over maps at a point where the slaying numbers might not be there for Kenny because the other guys are putting them up, and I think that's okay. But it's when the numbers aren't being put up and the team is losing, that's when it becomes more of an issue. And that's been a thing we've talked about over the years is there's only X number of kills on the map. So if Hydra, Scrap, and Abizi are all dropping 30 plus, it's natural that Kenny's going to most likely have a negative KD and maybe be like 20 and 25 or something like that. But it's when those negative stat lines are coming at the point when the team is also losing, that's when it becomes a bigger issue, and that's when the fans start harping on it and stuff like that. So I don't know. I don't necessarily I think just the winning pedigree and the leadership that Kenny can bring can be valuable, but just the coaching staff at LAT, they all just have to come together to find the best way as a system that the team can operate and get the most out of Kenny to lead to the team's success. And I think if they do that, I think that this team still has the potential to be very scary. And it natural reaction for a ton of people is to overreact early matches and early stuff like what we've seen so far. Still a lot of Call of Duty to be played, and it's very possible that LAT could still be the best team uh um and Kenny like has a return to form and all this just doesn't matter that we're talking about. But I think that's just at this point in the season, like that's got to be the one talking point for this LAT team is what can they do to bring the best out of Kenny. And if they can't find a solution to that, that's when they gotta start looking at alternative options.
And they can't really change too much about this team because like Scrappy, he was the MVP last year. Like you don't want him to change much. You want him to be pretty similar. Hydra is a former MVP, and the way that he interacts with Abizi, I think they would have imagined is like Simp and Abizi. Like it's a pretty close comparison, and that worked out really well for them. So it's kind of like we have this idea of how these three play and how they fit together. We just need this other guy to be like kind of on their level or like somewhere near their level, because if we have to like kind of reach back to pick him up, I just feel like it's going to cause all of these issues for a team that should be, they shouldn't be getting blown out by Paris like that. Like as much as I love Paris and I think that they're a great team, LAT has like I mean, they have maybe the two best players in the league with Hydra and Scrap. So like that really is disappointing that they weren't able to kind of be even remotely on the same level as a team that just got together. So yeah, it's going to be very, very interesting. Like I said, I think Major One could be a really big determining factor into like what actually happens. But my thing also is who are you going to pick up? Like if you don't want Kenny anymore, who out there is going to kind of solve your issue for LAT? And I don't think any of us have like a good answer for that question. I don't think that there's anybody that you can point to unless Alluka replaces someone on FaZe like a Booza, for example, and then LAT's like, maybe we go reach out for a Booza. Like, does that make us better? Maybe. But like that really is kind of like how I think about where this team is headed, or could be headed, I should say, because obviously, like if Kenny is Kenny, then not all of this is moot, and we all look like jackasses for doubting one of the best players of all time and someone who could win his third world championship this year. So, yeah, don't know, but yeah, it is. But that's the reason, like we're having this discussion, is because they're in fourth place, and that one Paris match was like, holy shit. And even the preseason was also part of that too, because they weren't really competitive with some of the other teams, including Paris and Optic. And I think people were like, that's kind of crazy that they're not like on that level right now, after being the number one seed heading into champs last season. Toronto up next. I do not think that this team's ceiling is as high as Optic, Paris, LAT. They're probably similar to FaZe, I would guess, but at most, I think they're like the fourth best team when they're all at their best. But they're 8-5 in map count so far. They beat Miami in Game 5. They swept Vancouver, and then they lost in Game 5 to Vegas. They have the rest of their schedule is against LAT, Carolina, and then they play 2 matches the last week, which is against Paris and Minnesota. So kind of up and down, like they get like a relatively easy match and then like a difficult match and then go on. Again, like I don't think that their ceiling is as high as these other teams. I don't know if you agree with that. And I think a lot of that comes down to insight and whether he is consistent enough for this team. And we should say, like they beat Miami, but Miami in that first match, especially Trakes, was not very good, and they didn't have presumably a ton of practice like in the States and together as a team. So I don't really know what to make of them. I think they're probably the one I'm like least sure about out of this group, even with LAT kind of being up in the air with Kenny. So what do you think about Toronto in general?
Yeah, I've been higher on this Toronto squad than you the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Last year you weren't a huge fan, and this year I love the potential of the Joe DeSeason Real SNG duo, and I just I'd love the Kleenex sub duo with any of these guys too, but seeing Kleenex in a flex and what that means for his next stage of his career and everything like that, I really love, especially, I mean, those 3 guys are just a huge part of like me wanting to watch Call of Duty and seeing them succeed and stuff. I think is really cool. And that's I still think, Insight has the potential to be the right piece for this team, because again, we go back to, just talking about Kenny and only having a certain number of kills on the map, yada yada. Like Insight over his career has been that guy who he can have maps, kind of sort of like Major Maniac for the 5v5 FaZe roster, where it's like he's just, he's gonna have low interactions and possibly go a whole map like 10-10. But if it gets the team to win, like that's what just needs to be done. So I do think Insight being like, hitting a next level or anything like that would be huge for this team's potential if they want to take that next step. But I just want to see more of this team. I'm really excited about the guys they got and the potential of this team, especially based on how Gentlemates have played. I'm not picking Toronto over Gentlemates right now. Not picking Toronto over Optic, but maybe I'm picking Toronto over LAT at this current point. Like that's where what I think of Toronto at this stage. I don't know, and we see that match next week, so that'll be exciting, and that'll be a good talking point for us to go into next episode and whatnot. But yeah, I don't have a ton for this Toronto squad. I really am excited to see more of this team, but I do think you brought up a good point about insight and getting to uh, maybe a next level or hitting that next stride could be very important to this team's success.
I mean, they're kind of in the same position as LAT. Like LAT, they need Kenny to be consistent and in a good place, and Toronto needs Insight to be consistent and in a good place, because that takes each of those teams from being a good team that they can win most matches, they're going to get fourth or fifth or whatever, to being a great team and being a championship contender team where they could potentially beat Optic or Paris or some of these other teams on a more consistent basis. So I think it's just about Insight. Like, he has to be more consistent. If he could get back to, I never think guys can get back to where they really were. I think like once it's gone, it's just kind of gone. But if he can get somewhere near that, I think it's it's potentially a great thing for Toronto and their championship aspirations. Next up is Paris. They are in second place in the CDL. They're all in second place, but they have an 8-3 map count. They beat Vancouver 3-0, then lost game 5 to Vegas, and then 3-0'd LAT, which that's the one that's going to get people excited because it was so dominant. They play Cloud9 next week, then they play Falcons, and they finish up with 2 matches, one against Toronto and then against Miami. So those last 2 matches that week will be very interesting, I think, for the team. They should beat Cloud9. They should beat Falcons. Toronto and Miami, I think, will be a good litmus test for both of those teams, Toronto and Miami, but also, is Paris still clicking after the break? Because they've been on a tear to start this season. I don't really have a ton for them. I just said be consistent. Like, just put the top down, just keep moving, because you're the second best team in the world, and you've been together for like 2 months, and you've only really played together for like a month. To me, that's a great sign. You're over LAT, which has like former world champions on it, former MVPs. You're over FaZe. You're over Toronto, who's been like this core group for a while. So I think that's a great place for Paris to be.
Yeah, I put don't cool off, and I think, talking about Miami earlier in the show, Miami potentially utilizing the holiday break to their advantage. Paris Gentlemates here is a case where I could see the holiday break coming at a disadvantage to them.
Yeah, for sure.
If they get complacent or anything like that. I don't think these are the type of guys. I think all these guys are super hungry to prove what they're capable of and prove that they're really good Call of Duty players. So I'm not necessarily worried about that, but that is just something that just came to mind for me. So felt like at least putting it out there, it's a possibility. But yeah, don't get complacent with this hot start. Don't cool off. Just keep doing what you've been doing, and excited to see what this squad's capable of this year.
Yeah, and I think we're all just kind of very much looking forward to another Optic Paris match, because we got it in the preseason, but we haven't obviously gotten it so far in the regular season. That will be what people will look at and is like, all right, is Paris actually as good as advertised, or is Optic, just a level above? And then obviously Optic is the number 1 team right now. They're the only team that remains undefeated in the CDL. They're 3-0, 9-3 in map count. They've beaten the Riyadh Falcons, the GT Minnesota, and Miami Heretics. Miami was a 3-2 win. It was a 3-1 win against Minnesota, 3-0 against Falcons. So if we continue this trend, then they will lose in Game 5 of their next match, and then they will get swept in a few matches here. I mean, they're the best team in the world, undoubtedly. I think they have the best player in the world, and Mercules. There's really not much to say. They're going for a three-peat, which is unprecedented. It would make them by far the most legendary team in CDL history or in Call of Duty esports history. I don't take a step back. I mean, there's nothing else to really say. Like what happened last year with Optic to start the season is like the exact wrong thing for a defending world champion to do, and they were able to salvage it by the end of the year. I don't foresee them being able to pick up a guy who changes their fortunes overnight like Mercules did last season. So it's just about continuing to grow with this team, like making sure the egos don't get very big and that they don't just kind of take for granted what's going on here, because this is like Optic, as much success as they've had, as popular as they are, Optic has not been a particularly consistent team historically. Like they go up and down very, very hard, and that's not what you want to see if you're an Optic fan, especially with this team. So just keep moving. Kind of the same thing as Paris. Just like put your head down and just keep moving forward, and hopefully good things will happen at the end of the year.
Yeah, I pretty similarly put down, just see how long you can remain the last undefeated team. And like, last year, after winning champs the previous season, last year they started with that infamous loss to Boston, the 1 versus 12 seed loss to start the year. Obviously that's not what the position they're in right now. So just see how long you can ride this out and see how many matches in a row you can win. Maybe they have the chance to, pull off some history and set a precedent that we'll be talking about in future seasons. Like, Optic in 2026 won 15 matches in a row to start the year, and then there'll be, maybe by that point, Falcons will be on a 13-win streak, and we're like, hey, look out for Falcons. They might catch up to Optic's record. So yeah, all seriousness, I think this squad pretty solid, pretty much right up there at the top, and they don't have anything really to worry about. I guess for them, you can say too, don't get complacent over this holiday break, or don't take the foot off the gas. Just keep going, see how many matches in a row you can win here.
That's kind of like the Warriors in whatever that 15-16, where they won like 28 straight games and they went 73-9. Like that's kind of what Optic should aspire to be, where you've already won the championship, you've won 2 championships. That's not what you're trying to prove. It's that you can kind of keep this thing together and that you don't have to go through like these massive swings, like a huge boost, and then you're just like crash landing a few months later. I will say though, you said like we don't have the number 1 versus 12. Next week, Optic plays Vancouver in their second match, so we very much could see an undefeated Optic play a winless Vancouver online, and I think that would be very interesting. TJ, obviously a revenge match, like one of his many revenge matches in the CDL. But yeah, I think that about does it for the wish list and the New Year's resolutions. Like they're not like, they're not as clean of like wishes and resolutions. I think it's just like an easy way to talk about some of these teams, and especially when we haven't seen them play now in 2 weeks, 3 weeks almost. Sometimes it's kind of hard to remember some of these teams and like how they really looked like in the first match of the season versus like the second week of the season, especially when it was 5 weeks ago, and our brains are goop basically just in general, but especially over the holidays. I feel like your brains just get worse and worse as the holidays go on. But yeah, I think that about does it for today's show. We will be back in a few days to talk about the 3rd week of the Call of Duty League season. Bink was mentioning that there's only 2 matches on Friday, and that's the case for the next 3 weeks going into going into Major 1. So a light Friday, and then 3 matches on Saturday, 3 matches on Sunday. And we'll be back before then to discuss the matches, break them all down, and give our predictions. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. We are also on Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at jbank with 2Ks, at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter at Ego Chall Podcast. And again, the next show will be either the 6th or the 7th, Tuesday or Wednesday. And then the podcast will go up the following day. So if it's on Tuesday, it will be on Wednesday. If it's on Wednesday, it will be on Thursday. So, we'll be back before the matches regardless. Again, Happy New Year to everybody. Belated Merry Christmas and all that good stuff. To anybody that's listening or watching, maybe they're catching up on stuff after the holidays, as is the case with me. I think that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys, as always, for all the support. Happy to get kickstarted here in 2026. Looking forward to the 2026 season of the CDL and 2026 season of Ego Chall content. I think it's going to be our best year yet. Had a pretty good year last year and only hoping to continue to build on that. So you guys are a big part of that. Appreciate all the support. Thank you guys as always. And yeah, we'll be back some point next week. Matches are starting in 5 days, like I said earlier. And hope you enjoyed today's show. Bit of a lengthier one, but I think we had some good stuff to talk about. So other than that, hope everyone has a good day. Thank you as always. And remember to send the chow.